So is there ever a thing in your walk where you ever begin to maybe question some of the tradition of the church? Because there ends up being some weird things that happen, like we talked about. I can't remember if it was Martin Luther or someone at one point, they had joked that there was like 1,000 nails that were used to crucify Jesus that were being, sold around and everything. Yeah. You have this tale about how they get, the skull of John the Baptist back, which is just this series of handoffs. And I was told to go dig up in this one place. Yeah. I mean, they're pretty, they're wild tales to hear about. So as someone who's, studies scripture and studies philosophy, what do you think when you hear about these traditions? Is it something that you think, well, it's strange, but the Bible's full of strange things? Or is it that you allow yourself to question some things?
Yeah, I think so I'll answer this in the way that I feel the most comfortable answering it is once the church says it's true, then it is my responsibility to receive it as truth. So what I mean by that is a lot of times when we see strange things happening in the Christian church, the church hasn't kind of put her stamp of approval on it. So we see, I love the example of John the Baptist, because I think there's supposedly there's 2 places that supposedly have John the Baptist's head. And it's well, which one's real? Which one's, I don't know, because the church hasn't clarified and said that's the real one, we're going to do it. But if that local community wants to say that one's the true one and that one local community wants to, it's okay, well, I'll probably go and venerate both of them and hopefully get one of them right. But the church hasn't said for that, right? So I can be skeptical and say well, maybe neither one of them are. But there's times in which the church has come down and said, this is a true miracle. This is God has worked in miraculous ways, and this is real. And
it takes a lot to do that. That's one thing I'm very impressed about when there's so much record keeping for modern day miracles. There's doctor's records. There's just files and files of it.
But that's the church is meant to be the most skeptical of those things, because there's we want to be the most skeptical because we think God is intervening in someone's life, and we don't want any reason for someone to doubt their faith because the church has verified something happening. So that's the way I look at it. And I tell people all the time, there's a difference between asking questions of God and questioning God. I stole it from another pastor, and I think it's really true. Okay, I can ask this question of is this thing real? Or is this an actual relic of the nails? It's well, okay, we haven't verified that. Or, okay, well, this one has been verified. We can see how it got here. And so that's the one we're going to say is true. But then there's also times when you're but does that shake my faith to say okay, is this the essential part of the Blessed Trinity, the doctrine around that? Is this the essential doctrine around the Eucharist and our belief in that? And so I kind of separate the two of acts of piety and devotion and essential doctrines of the church. Yeah. And that kind of helps a little bit. But every so often I remember I walked into a church in Rome and they're this is the crown of thorns. And there's a part of me that's is it? How? I know. Yeah. So but when the church says no, we think this is it, I'm okay, then the people in their time took this serious enough to verify it. And it's not really my responsibility to question people's faith from 2,000 years ago. It's to say if they said it was, they were closer to the event than I was. So I'm going to take their word on this one because I know how seriously the church takes these things. So.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Another question someone wanted me to ask, what is the purpose of a rosary and where does that come from?
Yeah. Great question. It comes really from the Psalms. As an expression of what the Psalms used to be. So the Psalms are the poetry in Scripture, and the Psalms in Scripture were prayed constantly by Jewish teachers and scholars of the law. You even see Jesus quoting the Psalms a lot. And so what happens is the church is developing, they take on these monastic communities where they every day pray the Psalms. So there's 150 Psalms, depending on how you cut it up. Sometimes there'll be 151, but there's about 150 of them. And what the monks and the priests are dedicate to pray the Psalms on a daily basis. And most monks back in the day would get through all 150. That was kind of the goal, right? They were praying all day, this beautiful thing. Well, these farmers or these non-monastic communities really wanted something to kind of continue to pray and to kind of saturate their day in prayer. And that's really where the rosary develops. It's this sense in which, like, how do we use the gifts that God has given us to continue to live a life of prayer in our everyday habits in life? So that's where we start to see. So there's 5 decades of the rosary. And so the decade is 10 prayers of the Hail Mary between and the Our Father and the Glory Bees between those. And if you pray 3 a day, you get the 150. And so there's this sense in which, like, you get to pray along with the monastic communities in your own life as the laity.
Yeah. So it plays a role in counting.
Counting. Okay. And like, there's this like meditative nature to just repeating the words. And it's the words that found in scripture mostly, right?
Well, one thing I found that's interesting as I think that with the rosary, I think there's a lot of people, again, it goes back to people not really being involved in church and growing in that faith and growing in their knowledge, that they don't understand what it is. I use this as an example. Do you remember, I don't remember how much TV you used to watch back in the day, but there was like 3 shows that all were based on tattoo cover-ups.
Okay.
Like this was a thing.
Okay, I don't remember this, but this is fascinating. Yeah.
So there was a woman on the show, and it was like this one called like Vegas cover-ups or something.
Yeah.
It was an older woman. She was in a nursing home.
Okay.
And she had a very bad tattoo on.
Okay.
It was very inappropriate. I can't share what it was.
Yeah.
But she wanted a rosary tattooed around her hand.
Okay.
So she had a very beautiful tattoo done. It went up her arm, wrapped around her hand, and they had done it. And she was like, "Wow!" And she goes, "Now I can say my prayers every night."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh!" Like, even as someone who didn't know much, I was like, "Oh boy!"
Yeah.
like something's gone missing.
Right. Absolutely.
Where now this has become essential
Yeah.
for prayer. So do you see stuff like that happen sometimes where there's like a misunderstanding where even like some people on the outside would say, okay, that's like bordering on idolatry now.
Yeah.
To say like that you're depending on that to have a relationship with God or prayer.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can always misappropriate things. I always think, this is why in the Old Testament, God was so strict about the laws of worship because he was so picky, because he knew how easy it was for us to take on idols. I think one great example from scripture is like the golden calf that kept showing up throughout the Old Testament.
Yeah.
It just looked like, the altar in the temple had horns that kind of came up in order to tie the animal down. So it kind of looked like a bull. And so what they did was just say, oh, it looks like a bull. Therefore, we're worshiping the altar. Therefore, a golden calf is equal to this altar, right? So the thing that they were using to worship became the thing they started worshiping. So absolutely, I think that's why God is very clear in scripture on the need for the rules around worship, because anything can become an idol.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, I always joke with people, like, God made a rosary for us. He just put it on our hands, right? So there's 10 Hail Marys, you got 10 fingers. So you can pray a rosary whenever you need, right? Because you're right. We can use it, misappropriate anything in the church.
All right. Well, that leads me to a question that I'm pretty excited to ask. Now, I've kind of been coming at you of one side of thing. Now I want you to come at me, and I want you to say, what are some of the biggest flaws that you see going on right now in the Protestant church?
Okay. So what are from me, what flaws do I see, or like ask you,
no,
hey, what do you, oh yeah, well, I do think that's one really interesting thing that I kind of wonder, do you think, so I have a belief that everyone in their own denomination needs to say, like, this is the church that if Jesus came back to today, he'd say, you were faithful to me in this. And sometimes I get the sense sometimes it's like, well, we're all equal and the little differences don't matter too much. I kind of wonder, like, what is that like, having multiple denominations and talking to them? How does that kind of play out? Do you have a sense that in the Protestant world, they should be able to say, like, we are the church that Jesus founded? Like, what's your thoughts?
I think it's interesting because you have some that develop in about the 1800s and even some today that are like, we're the only one, like, in this area, we have Church of Christ.
Yeah.
That starts out from a guy by the name of Campbell. And so sometimes they call him Campbellites. It's like a slur. But basically he's like, yeah, this is the church of Jesus Christ. No one else is going to be saved unless you go to this church. So I even had like some family that like, they did not believe you were a Christian. Unless you came from there. So you have groups like that. There's kind of been thing that's kind of come up since the 90s of the young Reformed movement, of Calvinism. They're very much, there's kind of a thing that comes out of them too, where it's like, man, if you aren't,
right,
Calvinist 5 points, if you're an Arminian, if you're Catholic, if you're Pentecostal, whatever, you're not saved. So there's that exists. But then I think you have movements like mine where we see the church a lot more as like what the word Catholic means, universal.
Yeah.
We see it as a universal love. Not that we're universalist, but we see it as like, okay, what's the most important thing? Do you have a faith in Jesus Christ? Do you believe in the Bible? Do you believe in the doctrines that we hold dear? Because basically, I mean, we hold the whole Nicene Creed.
Right.
The only different part being with some groups is, did Jesus go to hell or not? That's like the only thing. But even when we look at that, we're like, okay, like how important is that to who God is?
Right.
Because in the end, we're still talking about the Trinity. We're still talking about Jesus, who is God, who did fully become man, who was born of a virgin. So we see it like that.
Yeah.
And then it is a lot of the little things about like, okay, how does God interact with us?
Right.
How should a service look like? Is salvation once saved, always saved? Can we lose our salvation? And then with that, can we get it back? Is there speaking in tongues? Is there not? So there's that little things you get into, but then there's the doctrine, the big things that really unite us. Yeah. So I would say you do have a lot of that division, but then I think when you can have a mind to where you do think about the bigger picture, I do see a time where when Jesus returns at that day of final judgment, there will be unity. Yeah. And maybe we'll have some of those questions answered. Right. Yeah. Maybe God will say, y'all are dumb. Don't waste really my time with this.
Yeah. That's why I always tell there's some, anytime I have two schools, I go into the classrooms and the last question is like, well, that's a question we'll ask when we get to heaven. How's that? Yeah. That's a mystery question.
So much of that. So I hope that answered your question. You just have to have that kind of broader mindset, I guess, but it's different from group to group.
Yeah.